We all have things that we don't like to talk about, personal things. There are also things that we don't like to talk about as a society. Things that we talk about so little that they are taboo. At the start of last year, Tim Winton wrote a fantastic essay for The Monthly magazine. And that essay was about what Tim referred to as the C word. He was referring to class. And what Tim argued in that essay was that in Australia, an uncharacteristic silence has fallen over questions of inequality of wealth and power. This is the taboo that I would like to break with you this morning. Let's look at a big study that was published quite recently from the US. Two eminent professors, Martin Gilens from Princeton and Benjamin Page from Northwestern. They looked at 1,800 public policy questions and what the government had done about those public policy questions over a 20-year period. Their findings were striking. Organised business interests and elite economic interests were able to influence government policy. They could track that. They could influence government policy. On the other hand, average Americans were not able to have that influence. Their interests were simply ignored, and they did this by tracking what different income brackets wanted against these public policy outcomes so they could see what had happened. Now, this study is supported by others, and what all of these studies show is that organised business, elite economic interests can get what it wants, but the interests of the rest of us are ignored. Well, you might be thinking, that's the United States of America, different country. This is Australia, great Australia, egalitarian Australia. Things are different here. Let me give you just a couple of examples from Australia. Now, the first example comes from the Great Barrier Reef. Now, already we've lost more than 50% of the coral cover of the Great Barrier Reef over the last 30 years. But looking forward, experts like Professor Terry Hughes from James Cook University say it's real simple in a sense. We can have the Great Barrier Reef, or we can continue to expand the coal industry, but we can't have both. Now, I think that losing the Great Barrier Reef is unthinkable. This is a place of remarkable biological diversity, plants and animals. It's a stunning place. 60,000 jobs or thereabouts, often small business or science, depend on the reef. Earlier this year, one of the big national polling companies conducted a poll to see what Australians thought about this issue, and 85% of Australians agreed that they would put protecting the Great Barrier Reef ahead of expanding the coal industry. The majority of the people of Australia want to keep and protect our Great Barrier Reef. But what do the politicians choose? Every year, government gives away $1.8 billion in subsidies to the coal industry every year. Now, $1.8 billion buys you a lot of nurses and teachers. So which side do we think politicians are choosing here? Another very quick example. In just the last few weeks again, we have seen the government exempt 800 of the wealthiest private companies from tax disclosure laws. They did it because they were lobbied by organised business and elite economic interests. Now, to be really clear here, I am not saying business is bad. I am not saying rich people are bad. I am not saying you are bad if you work for business. I am not against capitalism or anything silly like that. In fact, if you look at what happens, it's often small business, local producers, farmers who bear the real brunt of this imbalance in our system. And if you think about people who work for big corporations, well, they're often at the harsh receiving end of the lobbying to change conditions that will impact on workers and their families unfairly. And then, of course, there are all the wonderful new social enterprises that want to do business altogether differently. This is not about being against business. But what I am saying is that the way our system is configured now, we have a system that privileges the interests of organised business and economic elites, and they are using that advantage to get what they want. Warren Buffett called it a couple of years ago when he said there has been class warfare over the last 20 years, and my class has won. Now, the real kicker in this, of course, is that the domination of big business is a block to social progress across all sorts of areas of life and society. Corporate social responsibility will not solve the problem because corporate social responsibility is always limited by the bottom line. Business cannot go beyond the profit motive when it's traditionally configured. So what do we do about this? Now, having already broken the taboo, and I'm sensing a little discomfort around this, is where I really want to push the boat out. If we want change, we must challenge power together. Now, that is very kind, but I do note that applause was far from universal. And as I was thinking of these lines coming into this talk, I reflected that, wait a minute, there are going to be some people thinking, hey, together, what's all that together business? This is the age of the individual. This is the age of my power, individual choice, individual action, individual freedom, individual empowerment. The power is within. The 7 habits of success, the 9 secrets of winning. Just lean in. Just do it. If we want change, we must challenge power together. We must do it peacefully, of course, but we have to do it consistently and with continuity over time. That means organisations, it means communities, it means movements, it means institutions. We must join things. To illustrate why, let me just talk drinks containers. Cans, bottles, 7 billion of them thrown away in Australia every year. They end up in landfill, beaches, creeks. You've seen them around in the parks. What do we do about this acting as individuals? Well, we pick up our own litter, or we don't litter to begin with. We recycle at home. Fantastic, good choice. Maybe you pick up the litter of other people. But these individual actions will not solve the problem. What we need is a systems fix, a structural fix. And what has stopped us from getting that broad solution is the determined lobbying of the beverage companies. I can show you a report from Coca-Cola in which they talk about changes to container packaging laws as a risk factor for their business. And so they lobby and they litigate and they do whatever they can to eliminate that risk factor to their bottom line, because that is what big business does. And they have been very successful. Our individual actions are not sufficient. Now, happily, on this one, in New South Wales, we have seen an alliance, a coalition of community groups, some schools, some sporting groups, environmentalists, join together and challenge the power of Coca-Cola and other big business. And what has happened? We now have the systems fix of container deposit recycling. I agree wholeheartedly with the words of the American writer Benjamin Todd. And what he said was that in a democracy, there are really only 2 types of power that matter. There's organised people and there's organised money. And organised money only wins when the people are not organised. If we want change, we must challenge power together. And only if we challenge power can we secure human progress. Thank you.